When it comes to champions in League that players harbor a dislike for, they're typically divided into two types, annoying and frustrating. They might sound like the same thing, but there is a slight difference in how they're addressed. When asked what is a champion that you hate, the first ones to come to mind are those of the latter group, due to the stronger emotion they tend to elicit from you. For example, people would be more quick to say they hate Zed or Rengar or Shaco on account of them being a frustrating champion to go up against. For the annoying group, however, while they're never the first ones to come to mind, if and when they do appear in your mental picture, hardly anyone has anything positive to say about them. Our subject for today happens to be a very prominent member of said group, Vladimir. Vladimir is one of the oldest champions in League of Legends history, and a common sight among those who people generally dislike going up against. But what exactly is the difference between him compared to other, more aggravating picks in the game? How can a champion carry a negative reputation yet almost never get mentioned whenever there's discussion surrounding the worst champion in the game or things of that nature? Let's find out in today's episode of Everything Wrong With, featuring the Suck Man.
You pick Vladimir, just suck all the dick, that's all he do is
Okay, but seriously, that's like half the reason why he's annoying. Anyway, let's cut right to the chase. What's the difference between annoying and frustrating? Frustration by definition points to the feeling of being upset or annoyed, especially because of the inability to change or achieve something. I understand there's the word annoyed in there, but bear with me. The important part of that definition is the second half, the inability to change or achieve something. Therein lies the distinction between frustrating and annoying. Annoying in the context of League refers to any champion that just bothers you, usually in a more mild way. Frustrating refers to a champion that makes you genuinely angry and upset as a result of the way they play or the properties they carry. Champions who fall in the frustrating group are likely to elicit a more negative reaction than champions who are simply annoying. An easy way to tell is by checking ban rates. Mel, for example, is public enemy number 1 patch after patch at this point given her notoriously polarizing design. An annoying champion though is of course not pleasant to deal with, but you don't really consider them in your face enough for them to be a concern. That is until they eventually do get in your face. Empirically speaking, Vladimir is a relatively stable cast member, thanks to being viable in both solo lanes and even occasionally as an APC. Vlad's enjoying a comfortable 4-6% pick rate in Diamond Plus and a slightly positive win rate with an innocuous ban rate to boot. Evidently, he's not considered a toxic champion or a balanced nightmare, but like I said, if you were to mention Vladimir to any League player, I'd be willing to bet folding money no one has anything good to say about him. Instead, you'll find people say things like he's annoying or he's a lame champion, and the focal point of that would be the type of win condition he goes for, which for the purposes of this topic I'll call neutral champions. Neutral champions are, as the name implies, a class of characters that tend to force a very neutral-based game state, both out of necessity and practicality. For those unaware, in any given PvP setting there are 3 game states: neutral, advantage, and disadvantage. They should be self-explanatory, but I'll go through each one briefly. Advantage pertains to a situation wherein you and your team are in a favorable position to take initiative, such as if Blitzcrank hooks the enemy ADC, that would be an opportunity for you guys to force a fight. Likewise, disadvantage refers to a scenario wherein your team is in a bad spot to attack, often requiring you to retreat so as to prevent or mitigate further casualties. Neutral is the opposite of those two game states, where neither team has a situational or tactical advantage over the other. You may have heard people discuss champions with a strong neutral game before. For instance, Ezreal has an outstanding neutral game courtesy of his Q and W poke, along with Arcane Shift allowing him to avoid enemy attempts to engage. By contrast, a champion like Master Yi has a poor neutral game on the basis of him needing to hard commit to fight you. When in doubt, champions who can attack you without having to trade or all-in you can be seen as having strong neutral. You might be able to tell where I'm going with this. Vladimir is a very neutral-focused champion by nature, at least in the early game. Neutral champions are those who benefit more from maintaining a constant neutral state than the competition by applying gradual pressure to then circumstantially push their lane opponent into disadvantage and/or not yet being strong enough to actively pursue confrontation. In other words, Vladimir wants the game to be in a neutral state for as long as possible, both because he just happens to be very effective in said position, and also because he doesn't really have much of an advantage or disadvantage in the early game. So how this contributes to him being annoying is that predictably very few champions actually enjoy playing constant neutral. For one, more than half of all champions in League are melee range. Even if they possess an ability with a bit of range, being melee inherently gives you a worse neutral state compared to those who are ranged, naturally making Vladimir a lane bully against those champions. An ideal game state for Vlad is where both laners are farming for half an hour while he occasionally queues you for damage and sustain. Done successfully over and over, eventually you'll start to bleed out, no pun intended, to which he can then finish you off by all-inning you when he feels up to it. Unfortunately for you, fortunately for him, Vladimir has all the tools to allow him to maintain a neutral state. Firstly, he's a manaless champion, meaning he never runs out of resource. I mean, technically he pays a health cost on his attacks, but he tends to recover more HP than he pays with the help of Q. Secondly, as a neutral champion, if the opponent is melee, they have to occasionally commit to a fight or at least a trade if they want to get within range of him to apply any sort of pressure. At which point Vladimir can either simply walk towards the safety of his tower, or if there's any critical ability he has to avoid, he has Sanguine Pool to escape. Sanguine Pool is one of the oldest untarget ability spells in the game, and also one of the longest at 2 seconds. Further, it's also one of the only untarget ability spells that allow fully unrestricted movement. The presence of Sanguine Pool makes it extremely difficult for the majority of champions to actively threaten Vladimir, since if you're playing Jax for example, you have to jump onto Vladimir to close the gap, thereby exhausting your dash at the very start of the fight. Which means if Vladimir pops Ghost, Flash, or simply tries to walk away, Jax won't be able to chase him down that easily. And then Jax's main lockdown tool Counter-Strike gets cancelled out by Sanguine Pool, lasting the entire duration of his E, so there's no way he can try to wait it out or recast it early. By that point, there's nothing Jax can do to really force the issue against the Vlad. The only way Vladimir can lose to Jax is by not respecting cooldowns or stuff. Outside of that, Jax has no choice but to constantly play neutral against him, inevitably leading to a negative outcome for the Jax. Apply that logic to most if not all champions in the game, even for those who can engage a bit more aggressively like Yone or Riven. Vlad's abilities excel at diminishing the pressure of his opponent. Any attempts to trade or attack him can eventually be healed back up, and being a ranged champion, it's much harder to zone Vladimir compared to say a Nasus, who needs to be in melee to heal off his passive. Sanguine Pool may not contribute anything all that beneficial for Vladimir, but that's not the point. The point is to negate one of his opponent's abilities. Camille Z, Yona's Q3, Irelia Z, Gangplank Barrels, Darius Q, Ilaoi E, Sion Q. Sanguine Pool is like the League equivalent of a floodgate in Yu-Gi-Oh! In a vacuum, Vladimir's W does practically nothing, a small amount of damage and a very minimal tempo increase. Whatever you heal from damaging enemies with this ability seldom if ever amounts to the health cost you have to pay to use it. The real merit of his W is that it negates his opponent's most valuable ability. It's a 1-for-1. The only champions who beat Vladimir are those with a strong neutral game of their own. Again, very few top laners have a better neutral than Vlad, and even fewer carry strong enough engage to force an all-in and consistently overwhelm him. Meanwhile, in mid lane, even though most mid laners are ranged, the vast majority of them depend on a singular ability to engage on Vladimir, which he can null by pressing W. Altogether, his manaless status, ranged attacks, theoretically limitless regen, and his ability to cancel out one of his opponent's abilities, more often than not their means of starting a fight, make it so if the Vladimir player wants to not interact with you, he can very easily do that whether you like it or not. Granted, a neutral state isn't even all that beneficial for Vladimir. He's not a poke champion, he's more of a burst champion, right? Well, yes and no. In the early game he's a poke champion. Mid to late game is when he becomes a burst champion, bringing us to reason number 2 why he's so annoying. Vladimir forcing a neutral state is a problem the same way Dr. Mundo forcing a neutral state's a problem. Both of them scale like crazy. It would be one thing if the champion gains nothing of noteworthy benefit by holding what is effectively a 20-minute stalemate. It's another if the stalemate leads to your eventual defeat. Vladimir is actually a very good example of how to tell if a champion scales well or not. As you know, his passive makes it so ability power grants him bonus health, and vice versa. While they don't infinitely bounce off one another, the increases you get from his passive are quite significant. You'll find a full AP Vladimir to be deceptively tanky considering hypothetically, 800 ability power amounts to well over 1200 bonus health, more than 3 giant spells. Secondarily, in addition to dealing more damage, Vladimir also heals more, increasing his overall endurance in addition to dealing more DPS. Tides of Blood in particular scales dramatically as well, 6% max health and 80% AP at full charge. So altogether, Vladimir deals more damage, gets naturally bulkier, and heals for more. Plus with more ability haste, he can spam his abilities more often, which in turn lead to more healing. That is why he feels like a massive backline threat once he gets going. A single full power Tides of Blood can nuke the entire enemy team for hundreds of HP, and with the generous AoE of both the Z and Ultimate, Vladimir is able to effectively two-shot several members of the enemy team, all while taking a fair beating to strike down himself compared to other mages. Meanwhile, the untarget ability of Sanguine Pool enables him to attack enemies while preventing them from attacking him back. Typically, once he burns W, if he doesn't have Zhonya's, even with a lot of health, you should be able to strike down Vladimir after he resurfaces. But usually, the initial blast of his ERQ combo is enough to put you, and by extension your teammates, in critical condition, forcing everyone to have to scatter. People also tend to forget how powerful the 10% damage amp is on Hemoplague's initial cast, which makes his teammates do more damage as well. So conceptually, Vladimir is not meant to be a one-shot burst mage, he's a battle mage. He's designed to attack at a consistent rate. But because of how strong his power scales and the ability to essentially front-load his DPS, Most people tend to build full AP one-shot Vladimir to nuke enemy squishies. Bringing it back to problem 1 though for a second, when facing a champion who in theory has a way to guarantee that he'll make it to mid to late game by playing in such a way to where achieving a significant lead on him is arduous if not outright impossible, depending on who you're playing, you'll find yourself unable to realistically do anything to stop him from reaching that point. Now thankfully, during this time Vladimir himself can also struggle to put a lot of pressure on you given how telegraphed his attacks are and how easily you can play around his spread range even as a melee. So while you can't really kill him if he doesn't like you, he also can't kill you either. It's a relatively boring interaction where both of you give up on doing anything in lane and just try to see who can out-contribute the other in teamfights. Problem is, we just established, not many people have the same kind of power that Vladimir does in the mid to late game. Generally speaking, Vladimir outpressures most fighters due to his ability to make a beeline for the enemy backline and blow through them, especially with the help of Ghost and Flash. He obviously outpressures most tanks in the game, and he outpressures most assassins in the game by two-shotting multiple enemies simultaneously as opposed to one. The only ones he effectively loses to are other mages whose high damage output, strong range, possible crowd control, and or burst damage allow them to do Vlad's job, but a bit better. Only losing to 1 or 2 classes while beating damn near every other is a pretty solid deal for a champion who can play extremely passive early game. And though he can get shut down by certain champions who can both face tank his damage while dishing it out in equal amounts, if your team doesn't have those champions, Vladimir pretty much becomes a stat checker. There are only 2 ways to stop him, either withstand his combo or outrange it. His Q is point and click, and it is impossible to sidestep on account of it being a 360-degree blast. He doesn't have to aim it, just be close enough to use it. Altogether, it's reminiscent of Dr. Mundo, wherein you can't exactly hard counter Vladimir. Even if your champion has an advantage, only a select few cast members can consistently beat him in either top or mid. And if Vladimir counterpicks into you, you might just be shit out of luck. A rather degenerate playstyle and win condition. Passively outfarm to outlast your lane opponent, and if they can't get an early lead against you, you'll outskill them and be a high DPS, high sustained battle mage who can also nuke the enemy backline right away. Even if they have peel or frontline, Vladimir can pop W to bypass all of that and do it effortlessly too. He starts off with half a Q bar, then runs at you, pops ultimate Q, then charge E while pressing W, and then empower Q when he resurfaces. A basic combo, but extremely effective. The inverse can also be aggravating. You can never really catch out Vladimir. If at any point he's engaged on, he can just pop W and then reposition, so you can't engage on him, but at the same time you can't stop him from engaging on you unless you outrange him. Then again, Vladimirs typically run Ghost and or they buy Cosmic Drive or Rocket Bell for an extra boost in tempo, and even if you outrange him, he can W through a Syndra Scatter the Weak, Zerath Orb, Ari Charm, Zoe Bubble, what have you. Eventually, it comes down to how hard you can punish him in lane and then how much you can play around his attack range. There really isn't much outplaying you can do against a Vladimir. He's a pretty forgiving champion to play in that he takes no real mechanics, only situational awareness and timing. Now fortunately for all of us, because of his neutral-oriented playstyle, Vladimir is often regarded as a boring champion, so he doesn't get played as much as he could be. And on the other hand, Vladimir is not a high-threat champion either, at least not until super late game. He counters you in lane by way of you not being able to get a lead on him, not necessarily by beating you in lane, hence why he's annoying, not frustrating. That said, I do think he needs to be reworked. His kit's not unviable, and it's not the worst per se, but with his potential involvement in Noxus affairs, what with how he appeared as an advisor to LeBlanc, I'd say they could definitely give him a more engaging and skill-expressive kit, not just being a stat checker. But what do you guys think? Do you agree with my thoughts on Vladimir, or do you think he's not as bad as I'm making it sound? Let me know in the comments down below. That'll be all for today, so if you enjoyed the video, I would appreciate it if you'd like to like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars and join my Discord server, and check out my other Everything Wrong With episodes if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.